Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Cowboys had an important matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, the Ravens may have put the Bengals away early, and Alabama suffered the worst loss in program history on Saturday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Dallas Cowboys got one heck of a win against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday Night Football, technically Monday Morning Football, as they defeat the Pittsburgh Steelers by a final score of 20-17. Here to talk about that with me and more is Landon McCool, one of the hosts over at Locked On Cowboys. And Landon, I know you're just settling down from the emotions of the ups and the downs in that game. Tell me, how are you feeling, and how did Dallas pull this one off at the end despite multiple turnovers from Dak Prescott?
Well, first of all, I'm still trying to figure out that last part. I don't really know how you go into Pittsburgh, play as poorly as they did in the red zone, and then finally kind of pull it together on one fourth down play for all the marbles and to win the game. Listen, like, there's such a thing as Steelers football, right? That's Cowboys football. To heighten the drama all the way up to as high as it can go. And then to either win or lose in dramatic fashion, like that's very much a Dallas Cowboys tradition. And to answer your question, how I'm feeling, I wish I could have 4 or 5 more deep breaths and then to sit down with an oxygen tank, I think, for about 30 minutes and just to kind of, sort through everything that's happened. Right. The Cowboys, I think, end up going, probably, was it 2 for 6 in the red zone? My math may be wrong there, but it was really, really incredible to see them dominate the game offensively, and then seemingly like pass some sort of invisible barrier on the Pittsburgh 20-yard line, and then feel like ineptitude suddenly creeped into their bones, and they're fumbling and penalizing themselves to death, and they can't seem to put the ball in the end zone.
Yeah, and despite everything, Cowboys still come out with the win. Dak Prescott throws for 350 plus, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, and again throws an interception both on Sunday night and on Monday morning. So these Monday morning stats that'll come out are going to be kind of crazy, I bet, Landon. But how did you feel about Dak's performance in this one? Obviously, Dallas got the win, but there are certainly some things that maybe Cowboys fans are and are not feeling great about with Dak right now.
Yeah, sure. The kind of 2 Daks that we saw between the 20s and then in the red zone was kind of surprising, and that's not necessarily a Dak trade that we've seen before, and maybe this was a single game situation. And let's give credit to Pittsburgh. That's obviously a very, very good defensive front. They were dealing with injuries, and to the Cowboys' credit, they were dealing with injuries on the offensive side as well. They lost Zach Martin for a part of the game due to cramping. Tyler Guyton is out. We don't know the severity of his knee situation. So, the Cowboys were dealing with kind of shuffling people in and out as well. So, it was incredible just to see them, frankly, look cohesive between the 20s. And then, they got down to the red zone and things got a little bit tighter. And I think the cracks started to show a little bit, just, the sort of discombobulation in the way the game took place. The hour and a half, long start, wait on the start, all the injuries, and then obviously the penalties. It doesn't allow for you to create very much rhythm in the red zone.
And I think this is such a huge win, Landon, for Dallas, because obviously, and I know you know this, the Cowboys enter a really tough stretch in their schedule. Obviously, you got Detroit coming to town, then it's San Francisco, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Houston, Washington. What is this next 6-game stretch going to tell you about Dallas, and what do you want to learn about this team in the next month and a half?
Well, at this point, I'd just like to see what the team looks like, who's playing for the team next week. The injury situation is, especially at defensive end, is ridiculous. The Dallas Cowboys, depending on the severity of the Nealon situation, have now lost their top 4 starting defensive ends. I can't remember the last time that's happened. They've gotten some good relief from some guys off the street and Golson, who's a 3rd round pick, 4 years ago, but that's going to be a problem, especially as they start to play some of these teams further on. I think they got away with it because of Justin Fields and the way that the Pittsburgh Steelers play offense. But I don't know that they're going to be able to get away with it with these more high-powered offenses like the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers.
How do you feel about Jalen Tolbert, someone who has come in, obviously, in Dallas, kind of looking for answers behind CeeDee Lamb? Brandon Cooks now out for this foreseeable future. Tolbert, 7 for 87 and a touchdown, gutted it out at the end of that game where he slid for that ball and looked injured, but he gets back out on that field and catches the game-winning touchdown. Is Jalen Tolbert someone that an NFL fan should start to get to know in this Dallas offense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially, look, one of the guys that we were talking about not being in the lineup is Brandon Cooks. We got the word yesterday, very surprisingly, that he had been placed on IR. We had heard that he definitely was going to play in the Pittsburgh game, but we didn't know that it was going to be for sure a month-long affair. Now suddenly we were all talking about how it's in order for the Cowboys to come in and win this game with all the injuries they had, they were going to need a breakout game from 2 or 3 players on offense. And Jalen Tolbert was one of those players that broke out. And I think the other one, obviously, was Rico Dowdle, who, in the second half of this game really took over and kind of added a physical element. And really what it does, Dowdle allows the offensive line to kind of express themselves, is that it feels like this offensive line has kind of had provided at certain points, and the running backs haven't been able to kind of take advantage of it. Tonight, we saw a running back taking advantage of it, running hard. Dowdle averaged, I think, close to around 5 yards a carry, and had that key drive that ended up with the touchdown that he got on the screen. On the kind of deeper route that he ran into the end zone, that I think really, between him and Tolbert, you had 2 young offensive players that maybe aren't household names that kind of broke out and provided a lift when, the Dak and CD situation wasn't always consistently working in the second half.
Stay up to date on the Dallas Cowboys all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Cowboys on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Baltimore Ravens may have put away the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday. Before we get to that, we go around the horn with a few big football results and some playoff baseball. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. We're going to start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And you can place that bet on Monday Night Football. The Kansas City Chiefs are, say it with me, home favorites over the New Orleans Saints. FanDuel has the Chiefs laying 5.5 points. Defense looks to be the star in this too, as FanDuel has the total over-under set at 43.5. So what are you waiting for? That's FanDuel.com to get started. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories about all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jaden Daniels may just be that good if this is the Commanders flatten the Browns.
Zone interception in the first quarter, and you're facing a team that's looking to get off of a 1-3 start in the first quarter of the NFL team. This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast. And if you're watching Commanders, you're going to do what every other NFL team would do, and you're going to hang 34 points on that same team from that point forward. Jaden Daniels started his Week 5 matchup against the Cleveland Browns, completing just 50% of his passes, 5 for 10. He threw an interception at the 1-yard line. Browns linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah coming up with that one. But from there on, the Washington Commanders, like I said, able to hang 34 points on the Cleveland Browns defense. But not just that, the defensive side of things for the Commanders, able to keep Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns from taking advantage of that slow start and holding them to just 13 points. For more on this game and everything going on with the Washington Commanders, check out the Locked On Commanders podcast 5 days a week, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It wasn't the smoothest game, but the Vikings record remains unblemished after they beat the Jets in London.
A good win, I guess, for the Vikings. Not as good as it gets, but a win's a win. 23-17, the final score of this one, and the defense heroed this game in London. It was a sloppy game, turnovers, tons of penalties, tons of miscues. The rain came in, nobody could get any footing. Absolutely not a great game. Special teams disaster class. A lot of stuff for the Vikings to go into their bye and think about, but they get to do that at a clean 5-0. They'll remain the number 1 seed in the NFC, but the defense really has to get pretty much sole credit for this one. The offense stalled out. Special teams was a nightmare. The defense, you had an Andrew Van Ginkel pick 6 that ended up being the difference in the game, and a Stephon Gilmore interception on Mike Williams, of all people, to end the game on the final Aaron Rodgers drive. In all likelihood, the last time we see Aaron Rodgers, got the dub against him. We're about to go live on Left On Minnesota Sports, so come tap in.
Over in playoff baseball, the Phillies are high drama as they get a walk-off win to even the NLDS with the Mets at a game apiece.
Hey everybody, Connor Thomas from Locked On Phillies, and what do you even say about that game? That is an instant classic playoff game. First and foremost, amazing baseball. That's what October's all about. But Nick Castellanos, man, are you kidding me? Bryce Harper was amazing. Castellanos was amazing. The bullpen has no idea what they're doing, and I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what to make of any of this. But what I know is the Philadelphia Phillies, they won a miraculous game today, and they head to Citi Field with this series tied. I don't know if I feel good about them in the series because there's some stuff they definitely need to work out. But to find a way to win that game, does that feel like a turning point? Does that feel like a momentum builder? I don't know how it couldn't feel like that. The starting pitching has been amazing. The offense woke up. Oh, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it through more of these games, but we're going to have to because this team is not dead yet. Check into Locked On Phillies tomorrow.
This Baltimore Ravens team is incredible. A 41-38 win in overtime against a division rival in the Cincinnati Bengals. You moved to 3-2 if you're the Ravens. The Bengals fall to 1-4. The Ravens showed a lot of grit in this game. They were down for most of it. They had to be in negative game flow, which is something that a lot of people have said, oh, well, the Ravens can't come back from behind. Lamar can't win games with his arm, which is just objectively not true in the first place. But Lamar kept this team in the game. The Ravens secondary was bad in this game. They were bad, but it never got to the point where it's a 3-score game. The Ravens were always down by 10 points or 3 points. It never went 3, 10, 17, 24. It was always 3-10, and then back to 3, and then to 10 again, and then back to 3, and then 10 again, and then 3. So Lamar kept them where they needed to be. And we heard post-game, Tyler Linderbaum was saying to the defense, the offensive message was, hey, get one stop, and we'll go out and win this game. And what happened? Marlon Humphrey comes up clutch with an interception. The Ravens get it into Justin Tucker's field goal range. Tucker has struggled this season, and particularly 50-plus over the last 2 years. He was 1 of 7 before this game. Just nails a 56-yarder through the uprights with crosswinds going crazy. But you can't say enough about Lamar Jackson in this game. It all comes back to Lamar here, this was an MVP type of performance. This is why Lamar Jackson is a 2-time MVP. This is why he's going to be in the running for a 3rd MVP, because of the player that he is, the unique way, both with his arm and with his legs, that he gets things done. And Lamar having 26 completions, 348 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 50-plus on the ground. This is a player that is doing things that we have never seen before, even from some of the best dual quarterbacks we've seen over the course of the NFL's history. And when we look back on Lamar Jackson, when we see everything that he has done over the course of his career, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we're going to look back on this game, a game that felt down and out. John Harbaugh said he was in a couple of times. It was in a dark place in this game. And it was Lamar Jackson, we've seen so many times, puts on that Superman cape, gets down to business. And I thought the receivers played really well in this game. Lamar is spreading the ball around this season in Baltimore, which is a very different experience because over the course of his career so far to this point, it's been, all right, well, Mark Andrews is down there somewhere. Let me just chuck this thing up and see if he comes down with it, right? But you see guys like Charlie Kolar getting involved, Isaiah Likely getting involved, Rashad Bateman getting involved, Zay Flowers went over 100 on the day. He's their number 1 receiver. Even Mark Andrews, who didn't have a catch over the last 2 weeks, he got involved with 4 catches in this game. So I love this Ravens offense spreading the wealth, spreading the ball around, and it forces defense to account for everybody and not just 1 or 2 players, plus the threat of Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry didn't run a ton in this game. Again, we talked about it, negative game flow and negative game script. It was mostly Justice Hill in the game. But when overtime came around, the Ravens got that ball first, and just throughout the time they possessed the ball in overtime, fresh-legged Derrick Henry against a tired and worn-down defense that has played 4+ quarters. I mean, that's essentially game over right there. And we saw Derrick Henry run up the left sideline for 51 yards. A lot of chunk plays for Derrick Henry this season running behind that offensive line. So we know Baltimore has to be better defensively. The secondary must be better. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins cooked this team. But in an offensive masterclass game and a defensive disaster class game, the Ravens defense was bad, but the Bengals defense was worse. And the difference was the Ravens didn't play scared and the Bengals did. Twice in this game in key situation, late moments, both in the first half and in the second half, Zach Taylor and that Cincinnati team played scared. They didn't want the ball back at the end of the first half. They wanted to run that clock out. John Harbaugh gifted them a timeout for reasons still unknown to me, and they get the ball back. John Harbaugh essentially gives them 8 points. The defense gives them 8 points. Then at the end of the game, Lamar Jackson botches the snap. The Ravens weren't supposed to win this game. Lamar botches the snap, fumbles it. The Bengals get it right around their own 40, or no, actually it was the Ravens 40, 35-yard line. The Bengals run it on 3 straight plays, get no yards out of it, sets up a 53-yarder from Evan McPherson, which there's a bad snap, bad hold, and he ends up shanking the kick. So who knows what would have happened if the Bengals decided to throw the ball, but that's playing scared. And so the Ravens took advantage of the Bengals' mistakes. The Bengals took advantage of some of the Ravens' mistakes, but the Ravens took advantage of more. So a gritty win for this team, and that's exactly what you need if you're Baltimore. 3-2 sounds a lot better than 2-3, especially with this team going to Washington next week. Stay up to date on the Baltimore Ravens all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Ravens on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, Alabama suffered its worst loss ever on Saturday. Saturday was a wild day for college football teams that fancied themselves national title contenders. 5 teams in the top 11 lost. Number 11 USC lost to Minnesota. Number 10 Michigan lost to Washington. Number 9 Missouri fell to number 25 Texas A&M, and number 4 Tennessee lost to Arkansas. That would already be a crazy weekend, but then you added number 1 Alabama falling to Vanderbilt, and it just gets to be fantastic. As Locked On Bama hosts Luke Robinson and Jimmy Stein point out, given the stakes, Alabama has never suffered a worse loss.
I think I'm comfortable saying, Luke, that was the worst defensive performance in Alabama football history. Now, Alabama defenses have probably played worse, but that's because they weren't good. This team should be pretty good. As a matter of fact, they just beat Georgia, the same defense. Now, I know they gave up some points and yards, particularly in the second half, but our talent level versus theirs, that was probably the worst defensive performance in all of the history of Alabama football.
No, I'm 100% with you. And look, I just want to clarify a few things. Number one, last night, I did a solo show, and then you and I did a show. I mean, we did over an hour's worth of pods after the show because it was so disgusting. And I had some people, and I even made some comments on Twitter about this worst loss in Bama history. I believe that firmly. I believe that wholeheartedly. And they were like, "You're crazy. You don't remember 2007?" I'm like, "I remember 2007. I was there in 84 when we lost to Vanderbilt. I was there. I wasn't there in 07 when we lost to La Monroe, but I was there for one of the La Tech losses. I've been there for some bad losses. This is the worst. And the reason is you have to juxtapose it with number one, what's at stake. Number one, where we are as a program and where Vandy is as a program.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. We've lost. I think we've lost to worse teams. We've lost to worse teams. I don't think we're giving Vandy enough credit. We say Vanderbilt in the sense that it's typical Vanderbilt. This is not typical Vanderbilt at all. And we talked about that last week. This isn't typical Vanderbilt. This is a really good team for Vanderbilt and a legitimate SEC opponent to an extent. Certainly Pavia makes them that way. So we've lost to worse teams. But Luke's right. It's the worst loss because of how good Alabama is. Because in 07, when Alabama lost Louisiana Monroe, that Alabama team wasn't very good. They were a 7-6 football team. That wasn't a good team. 84, when they lost to Vanderbilt, that was a 5-6 Alabama team. This is supposedly a national championship contending Alabama team. For them to lose to someone at Vanderbilt's level, I think does arguably make it the worst loss ever, certainly on the short list, because like Luke said, you got to take that all into account. But I would agree with anybody that says that Vanderbilt team's better than Louisiana Tech and Central Florida and Northern Illinois and Hawaii. I don't know that they're better, but they aren't the worst team Alabama's ever lost to. That's certainly not true.
You're right about that. It'd be sort of like saying, okay, if you're going 85 miles an hour, wherever you are, that's bad, because there is there's no speed limit, at least in Alabama. That's, you can have 75 and over, but if you're going 85 and a 20, it's a lot worse than going 85 on I-65. It's a lot worse. And so that's what I'm saying. And so I had some people push back on that, and I'm holding firm. Y'all can do what you want to.
Aces will not get a chance to win their third straight WNBA title. Liberty sent them packing on Sunday as Sabrina Ionescu put up 22 points. New York has been the best team in the W all season and will get their shot at that elusive first title. They've been to 5 other championship series, but are over. They await the winner of the Sun and Lynx series. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we are here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, will the Chiefs remain undefeated?
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.